can't as wealthy as their parents' generation.
Millennials suck at handling money.
Millennials will never own a home.
Millennials are broke.
Sound familiar? This is the narrative that us young people, millennials, Gen Z, we're constantly bombarded with online, that our financial situation sucks. And that's why I started this channel, essentially, with the aim of being able to change this narrative around millennials, Gen Z, young people, anybody really, you know, everyone is welcome on this channel. But yeah, to help you improve your financial situation so that we don't keep hearing these negative narratives in the media. That said, it's always good to understand why the media says what they say, why they think our financial situation sucks, if any of it actually holds true, and if there's any real factors in play that we need to consider. So there's this one video that's been sat in my Watch Later playlist on YouTube for quite a while now by Robert Reich called 4 Reasons Millennials Don't Have Any Money. And I wanted to watch it. I want to see what he says. Let's see if it's true. So today I'm going to watch the video and I'm going to react to it and I'm going to give my thoughts to it as well. So let's get right into the video.
Millennials aren't teenagers anymore. They're working hard, starting families, trying to build wealth. But as a generation, they are way behind. They're deeper in debt, only half as likely to own a home, and more likely to live in poverty than their parents. If we want to address their problems, we need to understand those problems. Number 1, stagnant wages. Median wages grew by an average of 0.3% per year between 2007 and 2017, including the Great Recession, just as millennials were beginning their careers. Before that, between the mid-1980s and mid-1990s, wages grew at 3 times that rate.
Yes, I mean, this makes complete sense, right? If your wages, your salaries are growing at a much quicker rate, then you've of course got more capital, you've got more money, more financial resources to be able to save and invest. And that's currently not the case. It's not been the case since, as Robert says, since the 2008 financial crisis. But this is only part of the problem, so let's keep watching and see what he says next.
Second, as wages have stagnated, the costs of essentials like housing and education have been going through the roof. Millennials own fewer homes, the most common way Americans have built wealth in the past. Education costs have soared. Adjusted for inflation, the average college education in 2018 cost nearly 3 times what it did in 1978.
So following on from that first explanation, there is in fact a second part at play. Because, you know, whilst wages will have been growing for the baby boomers back in the 80s, back in the 90s, the cost of living will have done as well. Meanwhile, in the era of millennials entering the workforce, our wage growth has been like this, but our cost of living has been like this. So what happens when the cost of living increases? Well, more of your wages, more of your salary is going to go towards buying essentials. And because you don't have the same wage or salary growth as the baby boomers did, then that's going to eat away at how much money you can save and how much money you can invest, which is a really important part of building wealth. And because you now can't save or invest as much, then of course you're going to build wealth at a much slower rate. It's going to take you much longer to be able to buy a house as a result. Another point on the topic of millennial home ownership that he hasn't mentioned, I think, is access to credit. If you've seen films like The Big Short, then you'll know that prior to 2008, mortgage brokers were writing mortgages for everybody and anybody, regardless of their credit history, their income, their ability to repay back. And it's what caused this financial crisis that we had in 2008, partially. Following this crisis, of course, all that regulation changed. And if you think about it today, it's a lot harder to access credit than it was pre-2008. For example, you'll have to put down more money for a deposit than you would have done pre-2008. And that's going to be harder given what we've just said about the cost of living increasing and wage stagnation. You need to have a good credit score, good credit history, not too much debt to your name. All these things are challenges for millennials.
3, and as a result of all of this, debt. That expensive college education means that the average graduate carries a whopping $28,000 in student loan debt. As a generation, millennials are more than $1 trillion in the red. In addition, the average young adult carries nearly $5,000 in credit card debt, and the number is growing.
Now, on the student loan situation, I obviously studied in the UK, but like in the US, the cost of education in the UK has increased Back in 2012, the government changed the maximum tuition fees in the UK from £3,000 per year up to £9,000 per year. And as a result, a lot of graduates now have a much higher student loan balance than they would have done had they studied before 2012. And 70% of graduates won't even pay that balance off in full. It will be cancelled before they're able to pay it off. And it really does have people asking, is going to university worth it? If I'm going to have to pay off all this debt at the end, my wages aren't probably going to grow as much. The starting salaries probably come down as well because degrees are now so common and so many people go to university. So in the UK, you've got people who are taking up apprenticeships instead of going to university because they believe that they'll be better off financially over the long term as a result. And a similar thing's happening in the US. You hear Dave Ramsey on his show telling people that you don't have to go to university if you don't want to. And if you do go to university, he of course encourages you to not go down the student loan route to pay for it. Now I recognize there are a lot of different philosophies on debt. Some people think there is good debt, some people think there is bad debt, some people think there is no such thing as good debt, that all debt is bad. However you look at it, this debt situation for millennials overall is bad. Because in theory, yes, you pay to go to university to get a degree, to get a qualification that as a result will increase your value in the workplace, that will increase your salary, your job opportunity prospects, and as a result, it's an investment in yourself if you want to look at it that way. The problem is that starting job salaries for graduates are much lower today, and as we've just seen before, wage growth is much slower as well, so expectation doesn't meet reality. In addition, misusing credit cards to buy luxuries, to buy treats, to live above their means, to buy things that you otherwise couldn't afford, adds and exacerbates this situation as we've just seen. Again, regardless of your philosophy on debt, a debt situation needs to be manageable. It needs to be under control. It needs to be being worked at, let's say. You need to be making payments. You need to be able to be trying to pay it down. Not just the interest though, you need to be able to pay off some of the principal. For those of you that are maybe not familiar with those terms, the principal is the amount of money that you request to borrow from the lender, and then the interest is a charge on top of that, and it's how the lender essentially makes a profit from you. What's happening in the case of millennials is that where debt is not being paid off, interest is usually charged annually, but it's charged on whatever the balance was at the end of the year. So interest compounds. So that means that if you have £10,000 at the end of year one, you'll be charged interest on top of that. Then the next year, if you haven't paid anything off, then you'll be charged interest on the £10,000 plus interest. If the next year you don't do the same, you'll be charged interest on the £10,000 plus interest, etc., etc. And that's how this debt situation gets out of hand. In some cases, you even end up with people who have more interest than the money that they originally borrowed because the repayments that they're making are not sufficient to get that interest down. To put the brakes on a debt situation, you need to be paying off more than you'll be charged in interest on a yearly basis. That way you can work it down and eventually you'll work and pay off the money that you owe. But again, easier said than done given the wage situation that we've just seen before.
Fourth, millennials are finding it harder than previous generations to save for the future. Among Fortune 500 companies, only 81 sponsored a pension plan in 2017. That's down from 288 20 years ago. Employers are replacing pensions with, essentially, do-it-yourself savings plans.
Now, I think this point on pension schemes does seem to be a bit US specific because here in Europe, at least from what I'm aware, you can contribute to employer pension schemes, and in many cases you do have an employer match. Are the terms maybe less favorable than before? It's difficult for me to say, but if you do have an employer match pension scheme, then I would absolutely encourage you to pay into that.
All of this means that fewer millennials are entering the middle class than previous generations. Most have less than $1,000 in savings. Many young people today won't be able to retire until 75, if at all. If we don't start trying to reduce this generational wealth gap through policies like debt relief, accessible health insurance, paid family leave, affordable housing, and a more equitable tax code for renters, millions of young Americans will struggle to find financial security for the rest of their lives.
Okay, so I won't comment on the proposed solutions because number one, again, they're very US specific and I'm not from the US, so it's difficult for me to comment on these issues. And number two, there's the potential that this conversation could become politicized, which is not something that I want to do either. What I will say is that the introduction of these schemes all depend on the government where you live. They may introduce some of them, they may not. In the meantime, do what you can to improve your financial situation. Whether it's coming up with a debt repayment plan, whether it's starting a budget, whether it's looking at different investments that you can look to, whether it's setting financial goals so that you have something to aim for. There is always something that you can do to improve your financial situation at any given point in time. And that last point right there, I think, is a major key in changing this narrative around our financial situations as millennials. Because as much that we can hope that changes at a political level will make life easier for us, will help us, will relieve us of some of the situation that we've been through, as hard as it is for us in the situation that we are, we have to act. We have to try and change the way we live, the way we act with our money, the way we spend, the way we save, the way we invest, to be able to change the narrative around finances with our generation. I really like this video, by the way. It was short, sweet, to the point, and it got the key points across in a nice and simple way for the viewer to understand. That's my opinion. So leave a comment and let me know what you thought of this video, and also let me know your thoughts on the situation with millennials and their personal finances as well. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think. Now, why not go check out these videos? And if you're not yet subscribed and you want to see more content like this, then make sure you hit the subscribe button with the notification bell so that you don't miss a single update. I'll see you on the next one, and let's get this money. Millennial money problems, huh?